Joined on the line now by Sharyl Attkisson, investigative journalist, author of an upcoming book called Stonewalled, be coming out pretty soon, I imagine. Also, if you want to learn more about what Sharyl's up to, you should go to her website, SharylAttkisson.com. Sharyl, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to ask you about this Benghazi document because, look, let me just give a quick summation, and I really want to get your take on it. This is the afternoon before Susan Rice goes on national TV and makes the case that what happened in Benghazi was somehow connected to this internet video and protests that spiraled out of control, some things we know now not to be true. And it was written by a guy named Ben Rhodes, and in this memo, which was literally hours before she went out and did these appearances, she listed some of the goals, and one of the goals was to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. Those who've looked at the document say it reads more like a political document than a national security document, and many people have said this document is the smoking gun that the administration set out to mislead the American people. Now, you've followed this story very closely. As you look at that document, how do you read it?
Well, here's the missing part, or I guess the questions that I still have after they still haven't turned over many of the documents and information. Ben Rhodes may or may not have written that actual part of the memo that he emailed around. There may have been, and I would assume, just based on experience, there was some sort of meeting at which these items were discussed so that these points could be made. So who is at the meeting? How is it discussed? And how is this disseminated not only to Susan Rice, but as you know, other administration officials used the same narrative, almost word for word in some cases. So one would have to believe that there was a meeting and a distribution of this narrative to others. I'm not sure Ben Rhodes is the end game. He is someone who distributed the message, but there may have been, and I would say likely were, others at the White House involved in coming up with this idea.
All right. Now, when the White House was asked about this document, they said, this didn't have anything to do with Benghazi. This was about protests in the region, and they were pretty sharply questioned on this by Jonathan Karl. And here's what Jake Carney had to say.
Right, John? No, you're wrong. If you look at that document that we're talking about today was about the overall environment in the Muslim world. The protests outside of Khartoum, the embassy in Khartoum, outside of the embassy in Tunis, the protests outside of the embassy in Cairo. These were big stories.
All right. So do you buy that argument?
Well, it doesn't matter too much what Jay Carney says. The fact is that argument or the information from the memo was used by so many administration officials. It had to have been about Benghazi, of course, because they used it when discussing Benghazi. So I think whatever he was trying to say, I'm not even sure what he was trying to say. It was very confusing.
Sharyl Attkisson, some reporters have looked at this. It's like a Rorschach test, how you look at this, these emails and what they say to you. And many reporters around town have said this is nothing new. All Rhodes is doing here is encapsulating the talking points that the CIA gave them. The CIA is still the origin of this, and they're just putting it in a summary form. Is it still standing firm, this whole putting it back in the CIA's lap?
Let's take a big picture look at this, because this happened a lot during Fast and Furious as well, where one federal agency kind of blamed the other and they tried to sort of keep the White House out of it. In the end, this is all the Obama administration. I mean, to me, it matters to some degree, I guess, who exactly did what, but the point is we now know the Obama administration officials in whatever agencies in at the White House were responsible for creating this narrative that was incorrect for whatever reason. And I think kind of nitpicking over which agency kind of takes us down the rabbit hole on purpose, on their part, it's sort of a strategy. But the CIA indeed did not say these things in their original talking points. They did not say there was a spontaneous protest, quite the opposite. They had a lot of other information in their original talking points that was removed, such as references to prior warnings that the CIA had provided, that there could be dangers in this region, and specifically Benghazi terrorist threats. So I don't think this was from the CIA.
Can I just ask you, because you are so knowledgeable about this story and what's been revealed and what is yet to be revealed, instead of looking backwards at what happened, what would you like to see happen moving forward right here, in a journalistic way, but also congressionally, perhaps?
Congress has the power to receive materials and information and call witnesses that, of course, the media can't. But quite frankly, even Congress hasn't I would say done an effective job in getting to the bottom of this quickly. It took Judicial Watch, as you know, a private conservative watchdog group, that filed a lawsuit to get these records, which had not been provided. I, too, had filed Freedom of Information requests to receive these emails and a lot of public documents, and had been provided almost nothing, even though I should have been given the same documents that the court required the State Department to release to Judicial Watch. That should have gone to everybody who had requested them and gone to the public, but they haven't. So there's sort of a game or something that's being played at the federal level with records requests. Congress could get to the bottom of that by enforcing their subpoenas. Another thing I think Congress is not doing well, when records are being turned over, they're in some cases having members of Congress and their staff look at them in a room as if we're in the 19th century. They can't copy them. There's no electronic copies. They have to make handwritten notes. They can't take them out of the room. And so there's only sort of limited understanding and distribution of the records. And the Republicans, in Congress have agreed to those terms. I'm not sure why. I certainly wouldn't. If these are records that they're entitled to see, I certainly wouldn't let them call the shots like that. But that's what's going on.
I need to ask you a delicate question. And look, you used to work at CBS News. This memo that we talked about was written by Ben Rhodes. The president of CBS News is David Rhodes, his brother. You have said that, you had a hard time getting this story, Benghazi, on the air at CBS News. Now, as a matter of full disclosure, I worked with David Rhodes over at Fox News. I know him well. But was David Rhodes part of the roadblock that prevented you from getting your stories on the air?
It's a good question, but the way things work, I don't deal directly with David Rhodes on stories. So what happens with me when I'm working in Washington is, I and perhaps the Washington Bureau will push a story to New York or offer a story. And the New York broadcast for evening news is the broadcast that decides not to take it, for example. Scott Pelley's the managing editor. Pat Shevlin was the executive producer. So all I know is they don't, we all come to learn in Washington on a particular story of mine, for example, that they don't want them. And I can't really say what happens or what the reasoning is.
Sharyl Attkisson, let me
Do you have any indication that David Rhodes, said we don't want this story on the air?
No, I don't have any indication of that.
Actually, I was going to ask you the question a different way. Are you aware, as a reporter there, if David Rhodes, president of CBS News, ever proactively told every reporter, every researcher, every producer, and every anchor, listen, my brother works at the White House, but that should in no way stop anyone from investigating this to its fullest extent. I don't want this conflict to infringe on our journalistic integrity. Go for it. Fair game.
No, but I will tell you, and that did not happen to my knowledge, but in a couple of stories when Ben Rhodes' name appeared or began to surface a long time ago, I argued that we needed to disclose the relationship just because that's what we should do, not because there's any guilt or any, guilt by association or that we had done anything wrong, but disclosure is your friend. It protects you. And as journalists, if we disclose that off the top in a story, then people won't look back later and say that we hid it. So I did argue the case and was told by a manager it was not necessary because it wasn't relevant, which I disagreed with. And in another case, when I wrote the story on the web, I did make the disclosure, and Rhodes had no problem with it as far as I know. I didn't hear from him, so...
Great. Sharyl Attkisson. By the way, Sharyl is still reporting and still writing. SharylAttkisson.com is a treasure trove of information.
I can't wait to read the book.
Thank you. Do you have time for one more quick mention?
Yes, please.
September 12th was the date that Hillary Clinton used the video story prior to this memo having been written for Susan Rice. So that's just an FYI.
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry. September 12th?
September 12th, Secretary Clinton used the video story at the ceremony return of the bodies,
right.
Stevens and three of the other victims, and did not call this a terrorist attack, and allegedly told the family members, we're going to find whoever made that awful video. So by September 12th, someone had already decided, as Obama administration officials used the video,
that this was the narrative, right?
So what I'm saying is, prior to the September 14th email to Susan Rice, I believe seems like there have been some sort of decision already.
And that's still information that we would love to know. How did they reach that decision, despite the information they had? Sharyl Attkisson, great stuff.
Got to run. Thank you, Sharyl.